I asked when the wedding is, and Ashley just smoothed her sundress, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "We got married yesterday." The fork slipped from my fingers and pinged against the tile, louder than it had any right to be. Sunlight striped the kitchen through the blinds, dust floating like confetti I hadn't approved, while Daniel stared at the grout as if it might swallow him whole. The refrigerator hummed, steady and indifferent, and my coffee turned bitter on my tongue. A thin gold band flashed on her hand, simple and final. The sheet cake from Costco, save the date piped in blue, sat sweating on the counter, knife hovering over the frosting like a held breath. The air smelled of cinnamon rolls and maple syrup, thick and sweet, and I could hear our old lab's nails clicking on the hardwood, waiting for a crumb of celebration that wasn't coming. Ashley's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and Daniel's jaw worked as if he were chewing on a confession. The AC kicked on with a shiver, raising goosebumps on my arms. Somewhere under the noise, I thought I could hear church bells that weren't there. I had a binder on the table. Tabs for venues, flowers, Pastor Miller's number circled in blue ink, my mother's pearls wrapped in tissue for Ashley to wear. I had imagined walking in with Daniel, my arm hooked tight through his, the way my mother had with me. Instead, I swallowed humiliation so sharp it stung, tried to keep my face from cracking while their secret, my exclusion, hung between us like a draft. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes, and I felt the house tilt, as if years of Sunday pot roast and birthday candles had all shifted an inch to the left. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white. I'll tell you how a family that never misses Thanksgiving ends up watching vows happen in silence. How a mother gets demoted to guest in her own story. If you believe milestones should bring families together and that honesty still matters, hit subscribe and stay with me for what comes next. My name is Margaret Evans, and I am 66 years old. In this house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, I have hosted more Sunday dinners than I can count, stirred more pots of gravy than seems reasonable for one lifetime, and tucked more family photographs into heavy albums than fit on the top shelf of the closet. Daniel is my only child, and Ashley, my new daughter-in-law, the girl in the white sundress smoothing the fabric like she could iron the air, stood at my counter and told me they got married yesterday. I bent to retrieve the fork where it lay shining against the tile, and my old knees reminded me I am not the girl who walked down the aisle at First United Methodist in '79, the organs swelling beneath my feet. The fork felt oddly warm in my hand when I stood again, as if my embarrassment had heated the metal. Sunlight made stripes across the counter, cutting the edge of the Costco cake that still said, "Save the date" in that cheerful blue script, as though sugar could coax reality back onto the track I'd laid for it. The room smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. Buddy, my yellow lab with a gray muzzle, clicked his nails on the floor, waiting for anything to drop. He is 12 now, patient, practiced at outlasting my stubbornness. I set the fork beside the binder I'd made, tabs, notes, Pastor Miller's number, the big band of plans that made sense until they didn't. "Yesterday?" I said. My voice didn't crack the way I thought it would. It came out soft, careful, the tone I've used when a student at the high school lost a book and didn't want to say so, or when Daniel as a boy trailed mud across the rug and waited for me to scold. I set my hand on the counter for balance. It steadied me to feel the cool laminate beneath my palm. Ashley smiled with her lips, not her eyes. "We wanted it simple," she said, and she tucked a bit of hair behind her small gold hoop earring like she was tucking me away too. "No fuss. No fuss. We are a family that believes in fuss. Birthday banners, a roast in the crock pot, quilts aired on the line in June, napkins ironed for Thanksgiving, not because anyone looks closely at the napkins, but because that is what my mother did and what her mother did. Fuss tells people they matter." Daniel was quiet. My son has my father's jaw, square, stubborn, and he clenched it like he was holding words in his teeth. He watched the grout between the tiles, the way he used to watch ants on the patio as a boy, tracking their movement as if understanding them would help. He couldn't look at me. He had always been the child who sought my eyes first, even as a teenager, even when he was taller than me, and his voice came from a new place in his chest. "Where?" I asked. The coffee had turned bitter on my tongue, and I took another sip for courage anyway. "The courthouse," Ashley said. "Franklin County Juvenile and Domestic Relations." I knew the building, tan concrete, the heavy door that always seemed to need oiling, a metal detector, and a man who called you ma'am, as if the title could make the bureaucracy gentler. "It was sweet," she said. "Just us. Just us." The words made a hollow I could not climb out of. I nodded like this was weather, like someone had told me there was rain coming. I looked at the ring on her finger, thin and gold, the kind of band a person chooses when they believe the simple thing is the truest thing. My mother's pearls were in tissue on the dining room table with a note that said, "For Ashley on her wedding day." Something old, something borrowed, something loved. I had written the word loved twice and then drawn a line through one, embarrassed by my need and my pen. "How did you celebrate?" I asked, and I don't know why the part of me that ran the library for 30 years needed details, as if cataloging would make it real, as if I could line it up on a shelf and learn its shape. "Pizza," Ashley said. She smiled a little more, as if the normality of pizza made it all tidy. "We went to Harvest over on Rich. They had this pear and gorgonzola one that was good," I said. "That's good." I glanced at the save-the-date cake, sweating under its thin plastic dome. Blue had smudged onto the clear lid where I'd tested it last night in a moment of restless hands and hope, making sure the frosting had set. I had a knife hovering over it as if the knife could bless it. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. He is 33 years old. He stands in my kitchen still like a boy when he doesn't know what's expected. They teach them new tools in school. "Use your words," I told him, when he was small, and banging blocks together took the shape of a tantrum. Sometimes we forget the tools when the stakes change. "Mom," he started, and it was like someone had lifted a brick off my chest at the sound of that word from him. I waited for what would follow. We didn't want to make it this big thing. You know how things get." He shot a quick look at Ashley, who offered a short nod like a teacher giving permission for the answer he'd rehearsed. "We wanted it to be about us." As opposed to about what? The words were out before I could gather them, and I wished I could pull their edge back, dull them. I watched Ashley's face, the way she tucked her chin a fraction. "I know you had ideas," she said, "and I respect that. But I get overwhelmed. My therapist says I need to keep things manageable, and a church wedding with 15 people telling me how it's done would not be manageable. Pastor Miller has baptized 3 generations of the Evans family, including Daniel under his hand, as a squirming 2-month-old with blonde fuzz like dandelion seeds. Pastor Miller went to high school with my husband, Frank. He came to the house when Frank had his stroke in 02, and again when the cancer came back, and then a third time when I didn't know how to sleep without the other side of the bed sinking. He eats my mashed potatoes too fast and always takes a deviled egg, even when he says he's watching his cholesterol. If he tells me a thing, it comes from a place that has known my kitchen, my grief, my son. I had circled his number in blue ink with the surety of a road sign. I thought about Ashley saying manageable, as if faith and fuss and a woman handing you her grandmother's pearls were oversized furniture you needed to navigate around. "I am sorry we didn't tell you ahead," she said, but it was the kind of apology that skims the surface like a pebble across a pond, a series of small touches with no sinking. "I know you like to be included. I like to be included the way a hand likes a wrist, the way a story wants its middle, not its fringes. I like to be included the way a person who brought someone into the world hopes to stand nearby when that someone builds his own." I thought of taking out the pearls right then, unwinding the tissue around them, their soft glow in the light that fell through the blinds. I imagined putting them in Ashley's palm and saying, "This is my love for you, not my control," as if the distinction would reach her. But it felt too fragile to risk that offer a second time in the span of an hour, like a bird on a branch you can't climb twice. "Would you like coffee?" I asked instead, because I am at my best when there is something to place in someone else's hands. Ashley placed her phone face down on the counter like she was laying a boundary between us and the outside world. Her nails were short and clean. She shook her head. The bright yellow strap of her sundress shone like caution tape. "No, thank you," she said. We actually have to go soon. Brunch with some friends. Buddy lay down with a sigh that sounded older than both of us. I cut a slice from the cake because the knife was in my hand and I couldn't put it back. The blue save smeared into a soft bluer. The sharp sweetness of the frosting and the collapse of sponge made a quiet sound that had the finality of something that cannot be undone. I set a piece on a plate and offered it to Ashley because my mother raised me to feed people even when they hurt you. She lifted her palm as if to stop traffic. "I'm off sugar," she said. "No offense." "No offense," I echoed. And in the echo there was a small girl in braids passing a plate of cookies to her 6th grade teacher, the teacher saying, "These are store-bought, aren't they?" When they weren't, there was the teenage boy saying, "I don't need you to pick me up, I'll walk." There was the widow getting a card with a printed signature and a grocery gift card tucked inside. No offense always means offense has been taken and hung out to dry in the nice sun where everyone can see it. "I'll take a piece," Daniel said, quick. He reached for the plate like a lifeline, forked a bite too big and chewed as if it were penance. Frosting clung to the corner of his mouth, a blue smudge. He wiped it with the back of his hand, the way he did when he was 9 and didn't want to come inside for dinner and knew I was watching from the porch. I remembered him in his little soccer jersey, the number 7 peeling at the corners, red cheeks from an October afternoon, the field behind the elementary school where the grass tilted toward hay bales. He had run like running was happiness, not obligation. I remembered the night he had a fever of 104, and the steam from the shower, and the way the cool washcloth in my hand shook because I was so tired, and how he had said, "Mama," and it sounded like prayer. I remembered these things, and the remembering made the kitchen steadier. "Tell me about your dress," I said to Ashley, because women talk about dresses when we cannot talk about what is underneath. She looked down at the sundress she was wearing that morning. White cotton, thin straps, the seam hitting just right on her waist, the hem grazing her knee. She stroked the fabric like a pet. "Not this," she said, almost laughing. "Just a simple sheath. No train, no veil." My friend Kendall from yoga came and took a few photos on her phone. It was really low-key and special. "Did your parents go?" It came out before I could stop it, the way a child touches a bruise to see if it still hurts. I had met her mother once, a short woman with bright lipstick red as winter berries, a mother who called her baby, who had opinions about florals and the price of candles. Her father had shaken my hand like he was shaking who I was. "No," Ashley said. And she didn't say anything else, as if explanation was a spice in short supply. "We wanted it to be ours." I nodded. I could nod until my head fell off. I took another sip of coffee and felt it cut like a knife that doesn't belong in any kitchen. "I have your grandmother's pearls on the table," I said finally. "From my mother. I wanted you to have them." The words hovered for a second, bridging the distance between us like a flimsy wooden span. Ashley's eyes flickered. She moved her lips as if choosing between 2 sentences, then picked one. "That's very kind," she said. Her smile was all teeth. "But I'm not really a pearls person. They're not me." The AC kicked on, and goosebumps shot up my arms. I remembered my mother's hands, small and competent, lifting those pearls from her neck on my wedding day. She had zipped my dress, buttons down the back like tiny moons. She'd smelled like Pond's cold cream and roses. She had watched me walk toward Frank, eyes bright as menthol. After church, we ate ham sandwiches and potato salad in the church hall, and Aunt Eunice's green Jell-O salad with marshmallows I pretended to like for the sake of family. Later, at the VFW, Uncle Joe's band played Runaround Sue slower than it should be, and I danced with my father and he whispered, "You're my girl." In that way, old men say what they know is almost finished. Those pearls were hot against my skin and heavy like inheritance. "Of course," I said. "If you change your mind, they're yours." It's still true even if she never wears them. You cannot change what you've already handed over in your heart. Ashley looked at Daniel again, like checking if the lines they had drawn together were visible from where she stood. He stared at the countertop, ran his thumb along the seam as if it were a path his finger could walk away on. He had always been a good boy. He had always loved rules until they didn't make sense, like the time in second grade when the teacher said you could not go to the bathroom during math, and he wet himself rather than break the rule. He came home furious at himself. We sat on the back steps, and I told him the difference between rules that keep you safe and rules that keep you small. He nodded like he was carving it inside himself. He used that memory as a compass more than once. I wondered now which kind he thought this was. "I don't mean to be ungrateful," Ashley said, and the ungrateful was the most honest word she had used. "But Margaret, it's our day. And sometimes you get a lot. I need to protect my peace. Protect my peace. As if my voice, my dinner rolls rising under a dish towel, my questions about seating charts were a storm system drifting her way. As if I was weather, not a person. I saw it then, the small tilt of the house I had felt when she spoke, the shift from me to Margaret. A son-in-law's wife who loves you will, at some point, try out mom in her mouth. Cautious, respectful, different from what her own mother is, a name that sits between you both like a pillow. Ashley had made a choice. "I don't want to be a lot," I said, and I tried to keep my smile easy. "I want to be your family." Daniel put the fork down. "We know," he said. "We know, Mom." He looked at me just briefly, and in that flash I saw my boy, stuck in the hedge at age 3 because he wanted to find the bird's nest, his hair full of leaves and determination, and the teenager standing in his 2 big tux for prom, his shoulders square like a man. "We love you." Ashley rested a hand on his arm, and he flinched almost imperceptibly, as if the touch surprised him too. She swiveled the ring on her finger like a coin trick. "We should go," she said. "We have a lot to do. We're meeting friends at North Star." She leaned toward me, but did not pull me in. She offered an air of an embrace, without the warmth of it. I did what you do when someone gestures toward a hug. You finish it for them because to leave arms hanging feels violent. Her hair smelled like expensive coconut. The bones of her shoulders were sharp against my hands. "Congratulations," I said in her ear, and hoped she could hear that I mean it, even if my heart was an upturned drawer. "I wish you every happiness." When they left, Buddy stood up and went to the door slowly, looking after them the way he looks after rabbits in the yard with more interest than urgency. The screen door closed with the familiar thwack. Outside, the maple at the curb held its green like a secret. I didn't cry immediately. I am not good at crying. I bake. I fold. I fuss. I carried the plates to the sink and rinsed the blue-smeared frosting down the drain. The coffee in the pot looked old. I poured it out and set the pot to soak with a squirt of Dawn, the smell a sharp clean that has always felt like control. I picked up the binder, ran my hand over the tabs. Venues, flowers, pastor, catering. In the pocket I had tucked the paper swatch for the table runners, light sage, to go with the hydrangeas out back that bloomed the exact color of my mother's eyes. Under that, a list of songs Daniel liked as a teenager, Johnny Cash and Springsteen, because a good mother knows what her son clapped his hands to in the back seat on the way to school. I'd made a note to download a clean version of one track just in case. I had a mark in red pen next to Aunt Liza's name because you cannot seat Aunt Liza near Uncle Ted unless you want the Reuben dispute of '95 to rise again like yeast. I thought of all the quiet savings that got us here. When Daniel was 8, Frank's first stroke came like a thief in the night. The medical bills were a separate weather system. I went back to work at the library, days, and at the Kroger deli 3 nights a week, hairnet, sore feet, always smiling when I weighed out a pound of Black Forest ham. I learned to stretch a pot of chili into 3 dinners and to cut coupons like rosary beads. When Daniel made the travel baseball team in middle school, I sold the extra set of china my aunt had given me, too floral, too fussy, to pay for his cleats. When he wanted to go to Ohio State instead of community college, I ran the numbers until they blurred. I said yes, and I worked extra shifts, and in July that first year, I made jam with black raspberries I picked myself to sell at the church bazaar. I kept the house when Frank died by the grace of God, and the careful folding of my grief into the corners of every day. That people came to this kitchen for soup, and stories kept me from falling through the floorboards. I never thought of those sacrifices as a bill someone owed me. I thought of them as a path I was laying so Daniel could walk without splitting his feet on the gravel I had known. Still, today, hearing yesterday, I felt the tab of what I had hoped to be included in and the realization that the ledger had been closed without my hand. I dried my hands on a dish towel that had a print of Ohio on it, all the counties outlined in cheerful red, and I laughed because that's the kind of woman I am, finding a joke in the map of where I've landed. Then the tears came, not the ugly sobs of a lifetime's regret, but the quiet leak of sadness that sits in the corners of your eyes until they overflow like a sink you forgot to turn off. Buddy came and put his head on my knee and looked up at me, and his eyes, soft brown, always understanding, made it worse and better at the same time. I scratched the place behind his ear that he loves, that I know because I have paid attention. He thumped his tail lightly against the cabinet. I don't usually reach for my phone, but I did then, out of habit more than desire. If something hurts, I tend to step toward running water or flour, not towards glowing screens. Still, I tapped open the thing and found what I knew I shouldn't look for. There they were, two smiling faces with a courthouse sign behind them, the sunlight making a halo out of Ashley's hair. The caption read, "We did a thing, no drama, just love." There was a heart emoji, the gold ring, a shower of stars. Comments from people I don't know, "Love this for you." Boundaries are beautiful. Do it your own way. Danielle from her yoga class wrote, "So proud of you for protecting your energy, babe." A woman named Tammy, who sells essential oils, said, "Pure." My chest tightened. Daniel didn't post. His page still had a photo of him and Buddy after the first snowfall last winter, Buddy's nose iced, Daniel's head bowed over him. In that picture, there is affection that doesn't need a caption. I set the phone face down carefully, the same way Ashley had, only my boundary was with pain. I went to the dining room and lifted the tissue off the pearls. They sat in my palm like eggs you don't dare crack. I thought of mailing them to Ashley anyway. No note, no explanation, like a rain I didn't announce. Then I thought of saving them for a girl blinking up at me from a cradle that may or may not appear. A grandbaby with fingers that find my necklace and pull gently because that's what babies do. I imagined blessing them with use, not with the sanctity of a box. I changed into my walking shoes and took Buddy out. The air, already warming, held the day in its fist. We walked the same loop most mornings, past Mrs. Nichols' azaleas, past the house with the flagpole with the flag that has a tear at the bottom no one bothers to mend, past the corner where, on Halloween, I always sit with a bowl of fun-sized Snickers and tell the little ones they look terrifying. People waved from porches, because that is what you do in this part of Columbus. The mailman, Cal, asked about my tomatoes. I soon realized my voice wanted to tell someone what had happened, and I chose to wait. Words are also food. Shared too early, they come out raw. I stopped by the church. Pastor Miller's car sat in his usual spot under the oak that drops acorns like hail in September. The sanctuary smelled of old hymnals and lemon oil, the way it always does. The stained glass windows made colored patches on the floor like a child's quilt. I sat halfway back. The pulpit was empty, and I did not think God is a registrar keeping track of who is right and who is wrong, but I did think about vows that were witnessed by more than paper and a clerk. I closed my eyes and saw my mother's hands again, steady as she fastened the clasp. When I heard his shoes on the tile, I didn't look up until he'd sat beside me. Pastor Miller is my age, but somehow he is always older in the ways that matter. He is safe the way a flannel blanket is safe. He didn't say, "What's wrong?" which is why I told him. "They did it without me," I said. "Courthouse, yesterday." He nodded like he had known it would happen, which made me a little mad and a little relieved. "And how is your heart?" he asked. "Confused," I said. "Sore in a way that feels older than it should be." I didn't want to rock the boat of anyone's marriage. I didn't want to be the woman who becomes a cautionary tale. He waited. "I wanted to walk in with him," I said finally, and my throat tightened around the piece of me that is 6 years old pouting on a step with a scraped knee. I wanted to be there the way my mother was there for me. "You wanted to lay your hands on it, Bless it with your presence, he said. I understand. He looked at the stained glass where Jesus holds a lamb that looks suspiciously like Buddy, if Buddy were holier. I also understand why some folks prefer a quieter road these days. The reasons are sometimes complicated, sometimes not. He tilted his head. Tell me about Ashley. She is careful, I said. She is polished. She says, protect my peace as if my peace is a thief. He sat quiet. She calls me Margaret. Which is my name, I added quickly, because I do try to be fair, even when it stings. She thinks I am a lot. Are you? He smiled a little at the corner, the way he does when he knows the answer and wants you to hear yourself say it. I have my ways, I said. I like to feed people. I like to organize the table and iron the napkins. I like to know who needs to sit near whom to keep them from resurrecting the Reuben dispute of '95. He laughed out loud. I like to be chosen, I said. I have been the one doing the choosing for a long time. It is hard not to be chosen. We all want to be chosen, he said. Even God. He let the quiet fill again. You have loved Daniel well, Margaret. Sometimes love is fuss. Sometimes love is stepping back and sitting on your hands, as your grandma used to say, while the people you love orchestrate their own disasters or their own joys. He bumped his shoulder against mine. You are allowed to be mad. You are also allowed to bake them lasagna next week and drop it off with a card that says nothing but, I love you. Will that fix it? I asked, knowing the answer and needing to check. No, he said, but it will keep the door propped open, which is what matters to me. He looked at me full on then. You might also consider telling Ashley one small truth that is more about you than about her. Something like, it hurt to be left out. Not with a pie chart of all the ways, just the sentence. See what she does with it. He sighed. The compulsion to manage other people's choices is very American at the moment, he added dryly. On both sides. I thought about that, about the way we trade declarations like slogans and forget the hard work of actually knowing one another. He prayed with me not long, a quiet ask for gentleness all around. When I left, he tucked a small card into my hand with a quote about kindness that I forgot to read. When I got home, Buddy fell asleep with his chin on my foot, and the house lay down with him. I made banana bread because that's what my hands asked to do. The phone vibrated on the counter while the bread baked, the smell of bananas and cinnamon turning the air into something like a memory. A message flashed from Ashley. Thank you for understanding this morning, it read. I know it wasn't what you wanted. We're going to do a small celebration with our friends in a few weeks, just a backyard thing, nothing formal. No need for church involvement. We'll let you know details when we have them. Also, we'd appreciate no drop-ins. We need to set good boundaries as we start our marriage. We'll reach out. We'll reach out. The tree suggests the leaf may call the branch. I typed and erased, my thumbs awed on the glass, more made for stitching and turning pages. Finally, I wrote, I love you both. My door is open. I am here when you want me. It felt like a blanket handed to someone standing in snow. You cannot make them take it, but you can stand in the doorway with it held out, trying not to shiver. I placed the banana bread on the rack to cool, and then, because I have always found the right size jar for the right size need, I turned to my garden. The hydrangeas needed clipping. The tomato plants had become a jungle of their own making. The stakes I had set in May must be reinforced in July. That's how it is with anything that grows. You think 2 stakes will do, and then the thing leans in a heavy rain and you're out there in the mud at dawn, tying it up again with old pantyhose and determination. I clipped basil for pesto, the smell bright as a new idea. I thought about making lasagna and freezing it for when they called. I thought about the pearls again and placed them in the box on my dresser. Not put away in a corner, but not out in the middle either. There is a middle for almost everything if you can stand still long enough to find it. Just when I had started to feel like my body belonged to my day again, the doorbell rang. I dried my hands and went to the front hall, smoothing the errant piece of hair that always escapes my clip, a habit of a lifetime of company. Through the glass, I saw a shape I recognized. Ashley, alone, hands on her arms like she was cold. I opened the door, and the late afternoon heat came in with her, shocking after the AC. "Can I talk to you?" she said, and her voice was smaller than this morning, almost like the girls at the library used to sound when they came to tell me a secret. I stepped back and she came in and stood in the entry like she wasn't sure she was allowed farther. Buddy sniffed her calf and wagged once, a polite acknowledgement. "I shouldn't have come without texting," she said. "Boundaries." She made a face like she knew she was breaking her own rules. "But Daniel's at the hardware store and I wanted to say something without him." I nodded and led her to the kitchen table. The banana bread sat domed and pretty on the rack, steam still lifting in a small ghost. I cut her a slice without asking and buttered it because some things are not up for debate in my house. "You don't have to eat it," I said. "You can just hold it if that's easier." She took a bite. The tension in her shoulders dropped a fraction. "My mom didn't come yesterday," she said suddenly, and I looked at her. "I told you she didn't because we wanted it small, but the truth is, she got mad when I told her we weren't having a big thing with their country club, and she told me she wouldn't watch me ruin my day, not after all she has done. So she said she couldn't support this choice." The word choice bent in her mouth. "My dad said he had a golf tournament he couldn't miss. Kendall from yoga took the pictures because she was the only one who showed up when I called." She said the last part not like a confession, but like a bone you've carried too long and finally set down. I felt my hands ache with the wanting to reach for hers and didn't, not yet. "I'm sorry," I said. And I was, for her, for me, for the fact that mothers and daughters can miss one another by inches and miles both. "I didn't want you to see me like that," she said, and when she looked up, her eyes were glassy. "I didn't want you to say, 'I told you so,' or to look like you were winning because you're the kind that always does it right." I almost laughed at that, because this house has known burnt casseroles and a son who did not call when he should have, and a husband who died while I was in the next room making tea because I thought the tea would fix something. But I didn't laugh. "I would not have said 'I told you so,'" I said. "I might have said, 'We can fix this,' which is sometimes useful and sometimes not." She ran her finger along the edge of the plate. "I'm not good at families," she said. "They confuse me. They feel like potlucks where I don't know what I'm supposed to bring, and I'm worried mine will be the thing no one eats. Your binder terrified me. Your pearls terrified me. I thought if I did it my way, I wouldn't have to measure myself against your way." We sat in the hum of the AC and the soft tick of the cooling banana bread. Outside, a lawnmower droned. Somewhere, a child shouted the way children do in summer when they have time to shout. Her words came out like they had been held too long in a small chest. "I am a lot," I said, and her laugh, small, surprised, made the air easier. "I can be. I like order. I like tradition because when Frank was dying, tradition kept me from falling apart into little pieces. It is the broom I used to sweep the floor of my life. But I don't love you because you will sit where I put you at the table. I love you because Daniel loves you, and because love is a decision we keep making, not a performance we stick to." I looked at her hands. Young, strong. "It hurt to be left out," I said, as Pastor told me to practice. "I am hurt. I also want to get to know you. Not the version on the internet, not the girl with the coconut hair at my counter. You." She breathed out in a way that made her look a little different, like a photograph when you wipe smudges off the lens. "I don't know how to do this," she said, "the part where we make a family out of strangers." "Neither does anyone, not really," I said. "We fake it, we ask, we apologize when we get it wrong. We show up with banana bread even when we said we wouldn't do drop-ins." I slid the plate closer. "We learn each other's worst stories and don't use them as weapons." She nodded slowly. "I should have worn the pearls," she said, and there was no mockery in it, only a thread of something like regret, even if they weren't me. "They can be later," I said, "or never. They are not a test, they are a bridge." We talked for another half hour, not about centerpieces or churches, but about the ache of debt, about her mother's sharp tongue, about the song that always makes her cry. It was Landslide, which felt too on the nose and therefore perfect. When she left, she stood in the doorway and looked like she wasn't sure if she should hug me. I reached out and did, fully, not the air half-step of the morning. Her bones felt less sharp. After she drove away, I stood in the doorway with the afternoon heat pressing like a palm on my cheek. I thought of bigger things, of Thanksgiving and who sits where, of children that may come and rules about kisses on cheeks and bedtime stories and which school they go to and why anyone lives where they do. I thought of the reception they plan with their friends, a backyard thing with string lights and craft beer in cans, and how I will stand at the edge without a complaint, bring the potato salad because a Midwestern woman knows when potato salad is called for. I thought of the text that will come with details and the way I will not answer it with a paragraph, but with, "What can I bring?" There is a conflict under this, deeper than cakes and calendars. It is about being seen. It is about who gets to name what matters. It is about me not letting my sense of being erased turn me into an eraser. It is also about watching, carefully, for the places where Ashley tries to cut, not just fuss, but family. I will not ignore those. When the time comes, when she says no to church for baptisms or no to Frank's photo on the mantle, when she says we are moving to Austin without asking if there is a way to make it work here, I will not shout. I will not hurl words. I will say, I hear you. And I will also say, here is what matters to us. We negotiate in love or we fracture in silence. For now, I wrapped a warm loaf of banana bread in a clean towel. I got out a card and wrote only, I love you, Mom. No, that isn't true. I signed Margaret. That is the name we are using for this part of the story. Perhaps in time, it will soften to something else. I set the bread by the door so I wouldn't forget in the morning. I put the pearls where they could see the light and not be buried. I fed Buddy his dinner. He gobbled the kibble with the gusto of a creature whose needs are uncomplicated and immediate. I turned on the porch light, not because anyone was coming, but because I have turned it on every night since Daniel left for college, a small lighthouse for a ship that might be passing by. When sleep came, it was thin. I dreamed of dresses that didn't zip and binders with blank pages. I woke twice and went to the kitchen just to stand in it and feel my feet on the tile I scrubbed with a toothbrush when I couldn't afford new grout. I am still a mother in this room, whether I stand at a church aisle or at my sink. That is the truth I will not set down, even as I learn the new steps. In the morning, I will go to the farmer's market downtown and buy sweet corn for myself and 2 extra ears just in case. I will see Mrs. Nichols and ask after her roses. I will pass the booth that sells honey and listen to the man talk about bees with the passion of a lover. I will let the summer air press like a reminder that this is the country we live in. Quiet houses, big stores, old churches, threads of families tying and breaking, and always the chance to tie them again if our hands will do the work. And when Daniel calls, as he will when he holds the slice of banana bread up to the light and says, "Mom," like he is thirsty, I will answer. I will tell him to tell his wife to bring back the plate because there are only so many plates that match, and I have kept things matching for a long time. He will laugh. We will find our way to the rest of it. I will ask when the celebration is, and I will say, I'll bring potato salad. And when I hang up, I will circle the date in blue ink and set the binder aside. The story changes, yes, but I am still in it. Even if my name is said differently, I remain, a line that holds steady when the other lines shift. The fight ahead will not be loud, but it will be real, and I intend to meet it with a pie, with a sentence that tells the truth without a weapon in it, and with the kind of love that keeps showing up at the door, holding something warm. The invitation to the backyard celebration arrived as a text 3 days later, as if a calendar had moved forward without me and sent an automatic reminder. Hey, we're doing a little get-together next Saturday, 4/8, at Kendall's place in Clintonville. String lights, simple food, nothing fancy. Friends and chosen family only, Ashley had typed, the quotation marks making it look like a joke and a rule at the same time. No gifts, no speeches, no prayers, please. No kids, adults only vibe. Casual white if you can, just for photos. Please arrive at 3:30 if you're family so we can do a few quick snaps before everyone else gets there. Parking is tight. Uber recommended. I read it twice, a third time, as if shape-shifting was possible. The things that bruise us are often wrapped in cheer. I could hear her voice in the sentence, breezy, planned. I imagined her working it out with Kendall on a white couch with a knitted throw, toes tucked under, the way young women whisper and mark their maps together. Protect the edges, keep it tidy. I pictured Daniel in the background, shoulder against a doorway, nodding in the places where nodding feels like support. Thank you, I typed, my thumbs slow. What can I bring? She answered fast, as if her phone were already in her hand. We're all set on food, doing tacos from Condado and a vegan salad from Brassica. Maybe some ice? Oh, and if you don't mind lending those folding tables from your basement, that would be a lifesaver. Could you drop them off earlier in the day? We have a lot to do. And one more thing, please no old photo boards. We want to keep it clean and avoid narratives. You know? I stared at the word narratives as if it were a new kind of bird I had never seen before, something shiny and suspect on the feeder. The photo boards I make for birthdays, pictures of missing teeth, baseball caps, red cheeks from sledding, a boy pretending he wasn't looking for eggs on Easter morning, become a kind of living album, our version of telling the truth about time. Avoid narratives sounded like a doctor's advice not to lift more than 10 pounds. Ice is fine, I typed. Tables too. I added a smiley face because that is what a person of my era has learned will soften the corners of a sentence. Later that afternoon, a smaller message slid in, like a postscript you're not sure how to place. Also, can we ask one more thing? I know you mentioned your mother's pearls. We think jewelry like that changes the vibe. Could you not bring them Saturday? I get that they have meaning. Maybe another time. I held the phone until my hand hurt, not because the weight was heavy, but because the light went through skin to bone. Don't bring the pearls felt like do not bring your grandmother's voice or your mother's hands. Do not bring the woman you were when you believed the world would be simple as lace. It was a small ask on the face of it, and I could hear a reasonable person agreeing. It is the accumulation that undoes us. Each pebble of no offense, each flake of please don't, each instruction dressed in cheer piles until you find you are standing on a molehill made to feel like a mountain you were foolish to mention. I went upstairs and took the pearls from my dresser anyway. I do not disobey often. I put them in my palm and felt their cool, their weight. I wrapped them in a square of my mother's old handkerchief, a white cotton with a faded blue border, a corner she had embroidered with a ridiculous daisy that made me fall in love with her all over again when I was 13 and thought she was made of rules. I put them in the pocket of my cardigan and walked around the room. I am not someone who hides things, but I am someone who plans. The pearls would not go around Ashley's neck on Saturday. They would go around the story I was carrying, holding it in a circle that would not break, even if the clasp sometimes stuck. At the library, when a student came to me with a complaint about fairness, she got more time, he got to pick first. I used to tell them to list their facts in order and then decide what to do. It gives your feet something to stand on when your feelings are a riot. So I made a list, in my blue pen, the same color I used to circle Pastor's number. It was not about getting even. It was about getting clear. They got married without telling me. Check. They celebrated alone, and then with friends, and now again with chosen family, a phrase that lifted up and pressed down at the same time. They said no to church, no to big fusses, no to pearls, no to pictures that tell how we got to Saturday. They asked me for tables and ice, not for potato salad or a blessing. They told me to come early for photos, to leave the part that glows to people who know where to put string lights and how to talk about energy like a bank account. I looked over the list and thought, perhaps I'm supposed to bow out. Perhaps the noble thing is to send a text in my careful way. Thank you, but I'll see you another time, and bake a lasagna and drop it on the stoop when the sun is soft. But the quiet in my chest did not come with that thought. The quiet that wants to come when a decision is right refused me. Instead, a warmth crawled up my neck and settled at the base of my skull. Not anger exactly, but a kind of insistence that rose from marrow. My mother, who used to say, "Sit on your hands, Margaret, when you are tempted to fix the world," also taught me this. When something is important, You do not disappear yourself to protect another person's preference. You stand where you need to stand, you say what you need to say, and you do it without a weapon in your mouth. Enough, I said out loud in my empty bedroom, and the word did not echo, it landed. It surprised me, the way a door closing can be louder than you expect. Buddy, asleep at the foot of the bed, lifted his head, blinked, and put it back down with the trust of a creature who believes you will use your voice for good. The binder sat on the dresser where I'd placed it the day of the elopement, like a book you're not sure you can read yet. I pulled it toward me. The tabs gleamed. Venues, flowers, pastor, catering, little flags of old plans that now looked like a parade that had been canceled. I added a tab with my blue pen and sticky paper, blessing. Under it, I slid a single sheet I wrote in my neat library handwriting, the one that used to make students ask me to write the labels for their science fair boards. I wrote 4 sentences. In our family, fuss is another word for love. In our family, we bless with hands and with words so that people know where they stand. It hurt to be left out. I will not pretend otherwise. I will bless you anyway, in front of the people you have chosen, because that is who I am. I'll be honest, my stomach turned even as my hand steadied. Exposing yourself in front of strangers is not comfortable when you have spent your life making sure other people are comfortable. My plan was not a speech. It was a small truth spoken plainly and a gift offered in the place where I had been asked only to carry ice. An exposure, yes, but not of them, of me. Kendall's in Clintonville, I told Buddy, as if he could follow a map, and I thought suddenly of the trip to the farmer's market downtown I had promised myself. Saturday morning, I would buy sweet corn and green beans, basil and peaches. I would be seen doing a normal thing, the way you ground yourself to a neighborhood when your family makes you feel like a guest at your own table. Then I would come home, iron a white blouse because she said casual white if you can, and decide whether to wear the pearls myself, a small rebellion, or to keep them in my pocket like a secret promise. On Friday, another post scrolled under my thumb because I looked when I shouldn't have. 2 pictures in a carousel, a shot of white fairy lights strung across a backyard, a long table with mason jars and eucalyptus leaves. The caption, "Building the life we want, not the one we're told to have." Saturday, we celebrate with the people who saw us. Boundaries are acts of love. Underneath, a comment with a red heart from someone named Tasha. Can't wait to toast chosen family. I do not think Ashley is a cruel person. I think she is a woman who has learned to call fences gardens. Still, the phrasing, people who saw us, felt like a hand pressed gently against my chest to keep me at the threshold. I took the church card Pastor had slipped into my hand with that quote I hadn't read, turned it over, and saw the words I needed. Kindness is clear. It does not apologize for being true, nor does it confuse being quiet with being good. Someone had scribbled it in his handwriting, not a Bible verse, but something like a rule I could live with. Saturday dawned bright, the air already warm even in the shade. At the farmer's market, the stalls glowed with tomatoes the color of my mother's lipstick the summer she decided she could be bolder. The corn's silk tickled my wrist when the farmer pulled it back to show me the kernels tight as faith. A boy played a fiddle near the fountain. An older couple argued gently about peaches. I bought a bouquet of sunflowers the size of dinner plates and 2 pints of blueberries because I know what people will eat from a bowl without thinking. I passed the Jenny's stand and gave myself a scoop of salty caramel at 9 in the morning because sometimes you sweeten your own mouth on purpose. Cal the mailman saw me and waved with the hand that wasn't holding a bag of green beans. All of it reminded me I am not a satellite orbiting a smaller, shinier planet. I am a person in a place that knows me. At home, I ironed. It is a meditation for my hands, the hiss of the steam, the way wrinkles surrender. I chose a white blouse with a small embroidered hem that only I would notice, a skirt the color of the hydrangeas out back. I stood in front of the mirror and decided not to wear the pearls around my neck. I tucked them back into my pocket, their weight a private anchor. The binder went into my tote bag, under the bag of ice I'd promised, and a dish towel printed with a map of Ohio. I lifted the folding tables, one under each arm. feeling the good ache of work. Buddy watched me with a worried crease between his eyes that made me lean down and kiss his head. "I'll be back before dark," I told him, as if the dog clock in his body could set itself by my promise. Kendall's backyard in Clintonville was as Instagram had promised. String lights already looped across the fence, a long table covered in white paper with eucalyptus stems laid like a runner, bees investigating and surprised by the lack of scent, a galvanized tub filled with cans of craft beer from Seventh Son and iced La Croix, a sign in neat lettering that said, "No shoes on the grass," because they had seeded recently and didn't want footprints to mar the new. A speaker in the corner was testing a playlist, the Lumineers sliding into Fleetwood Mac, into something I didn't recognize but had the clapping beat you can follow even if you don't know the steps. Kendall herself, tan, a high ponytail, a sleeveless jumpsuit, waved me in like a flight attendant guiding a plane. "Tables," she said. "You're a lifesaver." She didn't take them from me. I set them up along the fence, and when I finished, she smiled through me and shouted to someone else about a tarp. Ashley came out from the kitchen with a stack of cloth napkins, and for a ridiculous moment, my throat tightened at the sight of them. At least they weren't paper. "You look nice," she said, and it was both true and a placeholder. She was barefoot, her toenails the pale pink of ballet slippers. Her sundress was white again, different from the one in my kitchen, with a wide band that made her waist look deliberate. Her hair was up in a loose knot, one piece falling and catching the light. There was a small gold chain at her throat, no pendant. She looked like she'd studied a magazine's idea of effortless. "Thank you for helping," she added. She glanced at the tote in my hand. "Is that ice?" "And a couple of other things," I said. I set the bag beside the tub of beer and let her see the edge of the dish towel. I wanted her to know I had come with an extra, with love in a common fabric, not with gasoline. Daniel came around the corner then, carrying 2 folding chairs, his Ohio State t-shirt damp at the collar. He was flushed, hair mussed in a way that made him my boy again for a second. "Mom," he said, and there it was, the word that still fit. He put the chairs down and folded me into a hug that was more than polite. I felt him pause, like he wanted the pause to convey something else. Thank you, or I'm sorry. It was hard to tell. He smelled like grass and soap. "Thanks for the tables," he said, stepping back. He looked around like a man scanning for a job. "We're running behind," he said, which is what men say when they can't speak to the thing that matters most. It was still half an hour before the friends arrived, and I set the napkins beside the plates, as if I had been asked. No one stopped me. Ashley was on her phone, tapping furiously, then laughing at something on the screen. Every once in a while she looked up, scanned the yard like a person in charge of an event. She is good at event. I am good at home. That is a difference I can learn to honor and not to resent. People came. They called hello, as if the yard itself had invited them. A man with a mustache brought a mason jar layered with something that looked like a science experiment and said it was his secret sangria base. A girl in a wide-brimmed hat carried a camera. Everyone had the quick hug that is a currency among young people now. One arm, a pat, brief, sincere, turned on and off like a switch. I recognized a few faces from Instagram. The yoga friend, a couple from Daniel's work I'd met once at a happy hour where I had been the oldest person in the room by 20 years and had pretended it didn't make me feel like a museum exhibit. They smiled at me, gracious, and then their attention slid the way attention slides when the center is elsewhere. At 3:45, someone directed family to the side of the yard under a maple tree. The photographer, Kendall's friend, short hair, beautiful tattoo of a fern curling up her forearm, gestured with kind efficiency. "Let's start with Daniel and Ashley, then bring in family, then friends," she said. "Try not to blink," she joked, and everyone obediently laughed. When she said family, Ashley looked at me, then past me. Her parents did not walk into the frame. Daniel's father stood in my mind the way ghosts do, half color, half breath. It was me and my son, and the girl who had wed him without me, standing under a tree with the sun in our eyes. The first shot was Daniel and Ashley, foreheads touching, that adorable nose wrinkle that photographs well. The photographer said, "Now, Mom," and I went forward, the Old and New Testament, a joke I would have made if the air had been a different temperature. I stood on Daniel's left and put my hand on his arm. Ashley leaned slightly, careful not to rumple the white cotton of her dress. The lens clicked. I smiled with my teeth, and with the corners of my eyes where laughter and grief line up. "Okay, friends," the photographer called, and suddenly the space filled, a flood of bodies that smelled of sunscreen and hair product and summer. Arms draped, heads tilted. Someone shouted, "Chosen family!" and the group whooped. The word chosen hung there like a reflective tape, catching light, making sure everyone knew where to step. It is not that I don't understand chosen family. I have women at church who showed up in the night when the hospice nurse said, "It will be soon," and who left casseroles and stood with me at the sink to wash the good china I insisted on using for my husband's last birthday. The difference is, I do not say chosen to make a point, I say it to tell a story. There is a difference. Food came in waves. Condado tacos in boxes, little cups of salsa, limes cut the way my mother cut them, in small boats. A vegan bowl of quinoa and chickpeas someone said was life-changing. People drifted. Someone put out a game of cornhole. The playlist kept time. Ashley and the yoga friend adjusted the eucalyptus a fraction, and then another fraction, which made me smile in spite of myself, because that is fuss by another name. Paper fans appeared from a basket. Rachel, I learned her name near the tub of beer, fanned me for a second, kind as a granddaughter, and told me my blouse was beautiful. I thanked her. I imagined her 10 years from now with a baby on her hip, trying to keep cilantro from sticking in the kid's hair, and felt tenderness for the arc we are all on, whether we admit it or not. When Kendall clinked a glass with a spoon, a sound older than any of us, my spine went straight the way it always does in a room when there is a shift from chatter to attention. The spoon chimed against glass 3 times, and the yard settled. "Friends," she said, "thank you for being here to celebrate Ashley and Daniel in the way they wanted. Simple, with good people, no drama, no expectations." She beamed at them. They beamed back. A few of us will say a word. "Keep it short, keep it sweet, no sermons," she teased, and this time the laugh had an edge I had to walk past. A man from Daniel's office went first. He spoke of inside jokes I didn't understand, a project they'd pulled from the brink, the way Daniel keeps a plant alive on his desk, a miracle in office air. Kendall spoke next about the first yoga class Ashley taught, and how she had learned to breathe anyway when a woman in the second row scowled. Ashley squeezed her hand in gratitude. Danielle with 2 L's talked about boundaries as self-love and how proud she was of Ashley for doing this her way. Someone made a joke about courthouse romance that made Ashley's eyes go bright. Daniel ducked his head, his hands in his pockets. Then Ashley stepped forward with a glass held at her waist. Her dress caught a beam of sun and glowed. "Thank you," she said. "This is exactly what I pictured. We wanted it small, manageable, full of people who get us. We love our parents, and we appreciate that they're adjusting," she said, and my stomach tightened at the word. "And we're also so grateful for our friends who showed up and didn't make it about anything but us." She lifted her glass, and the air lifted with it. "To choosing each other and to keeping it simple," she said. "Cheers." The clink went through the yard. Cans tipped, glasses touched. The lump at the base of my skull loosened and then fluttered like a bird you finally stop holding. They were not going to ask me to speak. It shouldn't have surprised me. It still did. I did not plan to be dramatic. If there had been a better way, I would have taken it. I heard pastor in my head, kindness is clear, and I walked forward gently, my white skirt moving like a calm flag, the pearls quiet in my pocket. The opening between bodies is a kind of river if you look at it right. I stood at the edge of the small, clear space where the toasts had been, next to the planted fern tattoo that now seemed almost like a blessing. "May I say something?" I asked, and I did not take a microphone because there wasn't one. Only air. Kendall's eyes flickered, and for a second it looked like she would say no. Ashley turned to look at me. Her mouth made an O that could have been surprise, could have been calculation. Daniel was the one who said, "Yes," quietly, but in a tone that made it permission. Just a minute, I said, and my hands did not shake because they were holding something I know, the binder. I slid it from my tote and lifted the new tab so people could see the small word, blessing. It felt childish to show a label to grown adults, and yet the act steadied me as if I were naming stars. In our family, I began, and my voice carried the way it has across school auditoriums and church basements and kitchens with too many people in them. Fuss is another word for love. We iron napkins because someone before us ironed napkins and showed us that details are another way you tell people they matter. A small sound came from someone near the sangria cauldron. It could have been a laugh, but it stopped itself. In our family, I continued, we lay hands on people we love, not to push them in a direction, but to bless them where they are. Pastor Miller has put his hand on the heads of 3 generations of us and said words that made the air different. I know that's not what today is. I know you wanted simple. I looked at Ashley because telling a story without looking at the main character is rude. Her chin was high, as if a string held it up, soft hair coming loose from her knot like mercy. It hurt to be left out yesterday, I said. There was a tiny intake of breath from the general vicinity of the vegan salad. I did not add a sentence about social media or boundaries. I did not list. I just put the truth in the light where it could be seen, like the good china on the holiday table that you decide to use even when someone reminds you it could chip. I will not pretend otherwise. But I will bless you anyway because that is who I am, and it is what the women who made me would do. I took the pearls out then, unwrapping the handkerchief slowly, not milking the moment, but not rushing it either. The pearls lay in my palm, familiar as my own heartbeat, a small arc of moons. People leaned forward the way people do when something real appears in a room, something that matters beyond trend. These were my mother's, I said, and her mother's. She clasped them around my neck the day I married Frank 50 years ago at First United Methodist. They are not the point. They are a continuation. I wanted to chuckle because my mother, who wouldn't have known Instagram from a lamp, would have loved that sentence. Ashley, I said, and I did not call her honey or dear. You said you are not a pearls person. That is all right with me. They don't have to be you today or ever, but I would like you to have them anyway. Not to own you, to say that you are owned by this family's care in whatever way you will allow. Silence is a living thing if you let it be. It blew through that yard then, a breeze you could feel on the hair of your arms. Ashley looked across the space as if a bridge had appeared that she had not ordered or even wanted. But there it was, sturdy and plain. There are moments when a person has to choose, to step forward in spite of the splinter they fear, or to step back and let it rot. Her eyes went to Daniel, my boy, and his went to me and then to the pearls. He looked like a child in a new classroom, unsure which desk is his. He took one slow step toward me, and I could feel the eyes of strangers on my child's back in a way that made me want to throw my body between him and the crowd, and also made me proud that I hadn't. He reached for the pearls, not to put them on his wife, but to hold them the way a boy holds a found bird. He closed his hand carefully, feeling, I imagine, their weight. He stared at his palm like something was written there in small script. When he looked up, his eyes were wet in a way he would deny later. "Thank you," he said. His voice scratched. "Mom." Ashley stepped forward then, and I breathed without meaning to. She put her hand over his, and the pearls pressed into both their palms. She did not put them on. She did not fling them back. She let her hand rest there for a count of 3, the kind of 3 I count when I am trying to outlast a hurt. "Thank you," she said finally, and the words were not gleaming with the fast polish she uses on Instagram. They were dull and honest as a riverstone. I don't know what to do with them yet. The yet stung and soothed at the same time. "That's all right," I said. "Just keep them somewhere they can see the light." Kendall, to her credit, did not rush into the space with a joke to mop up the feelings. She stood with her fern on her arm and her mouth soft. Someone near the beer sniffled. The yoga friend wiped a tear in a way that made me like her for a second. Even Danielle with 2 L's looked at her shoes and bit her lip. The sound of a carpenter bee near the fence filled the yard, Then the playlist, as if it had been holding its breath, started again. The yard breathed. I stepped back, not triumphant, but steady. I had done the thing I needed to do in the place where it needed doing. It was not a sermon. It was a toast of a sort. It exposed not their failings, but my wound and my way. It made me visible in a story that had tried to give me a line and no voice. If someone thought I had overstepped, they would tell that story later in a car on the way home to someone who nodded and said, "People and their mothers." But I will sleep tonight without wishing I had raised my hand when the teacher asked if anyone else needed to speak. People came up after in the way they do when a curtain has fallen and they are not sure if they should clap. A slender man introduced himself as Tom, said he hadn't seen his mother in 2 years, and he liked the way I said family without pressing on anybody's throat. A woman with a little silver ring in her nose told me she hadn't worn her grandmother's ring until the day she went to court for custody of herself, and that the ring had felt like armor. Rachel of the Paper Fan asked me if I had the banana bread recipe in my head or if it was written down, and could I write it down for her on a napkin. I laughed, and the laugh popped something tight in my chest. Ashley stayed near Daniel, the two of them a small planet in the corner, hands moving, rich with the sign language couples invent. Once, she looked over at me, and I lifted my glass of iced tea a half-inch, just enough to say, "I see you." She gave a small nod back, an acknowledgement, not a dismissal, and not an embrace. I did not stay long after that. I am learning to leave before I turn into a caricature in someone's mind. I put my dish towel back in my tote, wiped condensation off the folding tables because I was the one who had brought them, said thank you to Kendall for the pretty eucalyptus that smelled like nothing but looked like light, and found Daniel near the cornhole boards. "I'm heading out," I said. He glanced around as if he would be left holding too many things if I left. "You don't have to walk me," I said. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." He nodded, then pulled me close. "I love you," he said against my hair. "We're figuring it out." I wanted to tell him that figuring it out is a lifetime, not a season. That the insurance policy you think you're signing when you say vows doesn't cover everything. That you need to pack your own lunch when it comes to grace because no one feeds you if you don't learn to feed yourself. Instead, I said, "Tell your wife the plate goes back on the shelf only after it's eaten off again." It is the kind of joke that only I get, and he grinned the way he does when I am being unreasonable on purpose. His shoulders relaxed. He blinked fast. We were all right in that beat. That is all any of us get. Beats. On the way out through the gate, I passed Ashley. We were at a distance where waving would be ordinary, but I stopped anyway, because ordinary is not the only way to make a path. "I'll see you," I said. "You will," she answered, and her voice sounded like she had been crying and had stopped, which is the most honest sound a voice can make. On the drive home along High Street, a storm built itself in the west the way Ohio storms do. Slow, then all at once. By the time I turned onto my block, the sky had darkened and the first drops hit in fat coins that marked the concrete. The porch light clicked on with its own timer just as thunder growled. Buddy met me at the screen door, tail high, eyes bright, as if he had known I was doing something hard and had held his breath to keep the world steady. I let him out into the rain for a minute, the way I would let a child dance in a summer shower, and then called him back, rubbing him with the Ohio dish towel that had been to a party, and returned, damp but ready to be hung on the oven door to dry. The binder went back on the dresser. I slid the blessing page back under the tab and pressed it flat. The pearls, still in their handkerchief, now carried traces of other hands. I laid them in the shallow dish beside my bed, with my watch and the ring Frank gave me for our 25th, the one that is not expensive, but has outlasted every trend like a stubborn old hymn. The phone lit up on the kitchen counter when I stepped back in to pour water for Buddy and take out chicken to thaw. From Daniel, "Thank you." That's all it said. He is economical with words when his feelings are wide. From Ashley, 5 minutes later, "I don't know about pearls, but I know about you baking. Would you teach me how to make those dinner rolls sometime?" I stared at the message and let the storm drum the roof. Dinner rolls are more than dinner rolls. They are the way my mother and I braided our days when words were thin. They are the way I measure how much patience I've stored up. I typed, yes. Next Sunday. Come early. Wear an apron, you don't mind getting messy. Bring your 2 hands. I set the phone face down, not because I was drawing a boundary, but because I wanted to see the face of my kitchen instead. The sink where I have said 1,000 prayers. The counter where so many elbows have leaned. The smear of blue frosting that somehow still lingered on the knife from last week, because life is like that. Sweetness and error both, refusing to scrub away completely at the first pass. I wiped the knife clean now and stood for a long time looking at the pearly streak on the paper towel. Symbols find you when you are not looking. The knife that had hovered over a cake with a promise I did not get to keep had cut something else today instead. It had cut through an old silence, through the impression of a woman kept at the edges, through the story about who gets to say what love looks like in a backyard with string lights. It had made an opening. The rain eased. The road outside hissed as tires touched it, a hymn you have to be quiet to hear. Somewhere a child called to a dog, and someone's screen door shut with a thwack I recognized as home. I put the kettle on because that is what I do when the sky and the heart are both full. I thought of Ashley's text, of her being brave in a way that looks small on a screen. I thought of teaching her to knead, heel, turn, fold, the way my mother taught me, with flour on our forearms like dust from a place where women have worked forever. I thought of making space for her to put her fingers in dough without fear of doing it wrong, of saying, it will rise. It always does if you give it time. There will be more humiliations. I am not naive. There will be moments when I will have to say another kind of enough, and step back or step forward with the same calm. There will be Novembers where seating charts make me pull my hair out, and summers when they talk about moving to a city I do not like, because the jobs are better and the coffee is better and everything is better if you are young in a place that says yes all the time. There will be baptisms or there will not. There will be babies or there will be a dog. I will adore like a grandchild, because sometimes God gives you 4 legs and a tail as a practice, run for unconditional. I do not get to decide those things. I do get to decide what I bring: potato salad, banana bread, a story about fuss as a dialect of love, a pair of pearls that are not a test, a binder with a tab I made myself labeled blessing. When I lay down that night, the storm breath ran out and the world went quiet. The porch light clicked off with the timer, and I turned it on again, on purpose, because old habits are not broken in a day, and because a lighthouse is only useful if it keeps shining, whether or not the ship you are watching for turns toward you. I touched the spot on my dresser where the pearls rested through a thin layer of cotton and thought of their small, cool moons in Ashley's hand earlier, pressing little crescents into skin, leaving marks that would fade. You are not supposed to see where love touched you right away. Sometimes the evidence shows up in the morning. Sometimes it shows up months later when you find yourself picking up a pack of yeast at Kroger and turning your cart towards someone else's house. We do our part. That is enough. And when it isn't, we say enough and make a new part. Sunday morning, the church bell I couldn't hear. On the day they said courthouse rang as if the sound had finally found me. Pastor shook my hand and then squeezed it once more as if he'd overheard my heart. After service, Mrs. Nichols pressed 3 recipe cards into my hand, the old Ohio version of a love letter, and I laughed, promising to bring deviled eggs next time, even if Ashley calls it a vibe killer. Ashley would come at 2 to learn how dough works. I set out the flour and the big yellow mixing bowl with a crack in it that has never run to the bottom. I tied on the apron with cherries and thought of all the cherries we have all been given, the sour and the sweet. When the knock came, Buddy's tail thumped the cupboard and I said, "Come in," before I reached the door. Because this is my house and because sometimes you open the door before you've had a chance to talk yourself out of it. Ashley stepped in, hair in a ponytail, no jewelry, a little nervous. She smiled with more eyes this time. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded, like someone at the top of a water slide who knows they will scream and then be glad they did it. "Ready," she said. We washed our hands at the sink. Side by side, in the small, good light, We sprinkled yeast and felt it wake. We washed our hands at the sink. Side by side, in the small good light, we sprinkled yeast and felt it wake. The tiny granules puffing like a promise, a minute rumble of life under our fingers. The dough took to my palms with the soft resistance of a thing that will be what you ask it to be if you're patient and firm. I showed her how to press the heel of my hand, fold, turn, fold again, how to count to 20 and then to breathe. She laughed at herself when flour puffed the tip of her nose white, and for the first time in days, I felt like the world was moving back toward the kitchen where it belongs. As we worked, the house inhaled and exhaled around us, the kettle hissing on the stove, Buddy patting the floor like a metronome, the radiator's faint rattle. Ash's hands were warm. She listened like someone who has learned to hear even when people do not say much. She asked about the exact feel of the dough, soft, not sticky, like a student asking about the exact shade of blue in my playlists back at the library. "When do you know it's ready?" she asked. "When it looks like a pillow and it springs back when you poke it," I said. "And when your hands remember the motion, that's how you know. The rest is faith." She nodded, and the way she said the word faith was careful, like she was tasting a fruit she didn't know if she liked yet. We let the dough rest under a towel and sat at the table with bowls of blueberries and the remains of the banana bread. She told me, in small confessions stitched with humor, about packing a box of dishes from her mother's house 3 years ago and realizing none of them felt like hers. She told me about 2 failed attempts at making casseroles because she had thought each ingredient needed to be local and organic, and then bought everything at Kroger and cried when it still tasted fine. "You worry too much," I said, "because if you can't admonish someone gently while you measure sugar, you're doing life wrong." She smiled in the way people do when they're learning you won't bite. Food forgives a lot. It forgives awkward conversations, bawdy stories, and bless its heart, burnt edges. We talked about Daniel in the way women talk about the men they love. Fond, factual, a little exasperated, entirely loyal. She told me the story of the photograph she'd taken in the courthouse, how the light had come in and haloed his hair, and how, even then, he had looked like someone who had decided, finally, to stop being apologetic about his joy. I told her about the time he'd cut his hair short in college and tried to hide it with a hat, how he had come home sheepish and then left with a paper bag of my leftover lasagna because he didn't want to be alone. She laughed, and then kissed the dough as if making sure it knew it was loved. When the rolls came out of the oven, golden and puffed like small suns, the smell filled the house in a way that made everything else soften. We slathered butter and sat at my small kitchen table with Buddy curled at our feet. She asked if the rolls were my mother's recipe. I told her they were my mother's, with a pinch of my husband Frank's stubbornness and the patience I'd learned in the Kroger deli. She bit into one, closed her eyes, and I watched the corners of her mouth loosen like a knot. "They're perfect," she said simply. It was a compliment and also a treaty. After the rolls, we did what women do when they have been among each other long enough. We started to talk about the things that mattered, the things that didn't fit on Instagram captions. She told me about setting boundaries with her own mother, about how she had practiced saying no in the mirror for a week, and how her voice had felt different when she used it outside. She told me she feared becoming someone who left people out because she wanted a clean life. She feared hurting with so much intention that the hurt became a habit. "I didn't want that for us," she said, eyes honest. "So I decided small." It didn't occur to me that small would hurt you. It did not surprise me that she had been trying to protect something. Young people are often so good at constructing fences, they think we'll keep the weather away. What surprised me was how tired she sounded when she said it, tired in a way that made my heart clamp and then uncoil. "No one can build a fence that keeps every storm out," I told her, "but we can build some gates. Gates mean you can choose who you let through. Being chosen, that's different from being kept out." She wrapped her hands around the hot mug of tea I'd poured and listened like she was collecting new tools. "Teach me to braid rolls," she said suddenly, as if that were a promise to herself. "Teach me the part I didn't know I needed." I found myself promising, and the promise felt like something small and fierce. The immediate consequence of the night, what the blessing had set in motion, was an ease that moved through our house like rain through gutters. It was not dramatic peace so much as an untying of a knot. We had bared a truth in public and then given it the small antidote of bread and hands. It is a strange thing to find your place again after being nudged. You do not snap back, you rearrange. Later that evening, when I put the pearls by the bedside, I felt their weight differently. Not as a thing to prove my belonging, so much as a token that time and hands and women had threaded through. On Sunday, Pastor Miller did something that matter-of-factly made my heart want to weep. After the service, he asked to speak with me, and then, as if deciding I deserved a small parade, he clapped his hands and suggested we do a little family blessing at the church on Thursday evening. "No big deal," he said, like the man who had held my hand in the worst parts of losing Frank and made the world polite enough to breathe again. "Just a few of you. Bring whoever you want. We can light a candle, say a prayer, and hand over blessings like you were handing down a recipe." I thought of how rules had been bent back into place. I thought of the pearls in the dish and of how they had moved from my hand to ashes and back to mine in the same soft loop. I said, yes. Inside, I felt a kind of freedom settle like clean laundry. The blessing at Kendall's had been public and noisy kind. This one would be small and still. It would be a bridge made of two methods, an intimate service with pastor's steady hands and the backing of a community that knows our family history like a hymn. On Thursday, we went. Ashley came early, and together we walked across the churchyard where my father had mowed and my son had once lost a glove. Pastor lit the candle like someone who believes in small flame as a protest against dark. The people who came were just enough. Pastor Miller and his wife, Mrs. Nichols from down the street, a niece who had flown in from Cincinnati with a job she loved but gave up an evening for us. We circled and held hands. I spoke. I did not make a speech. I offered a blessing I had written on a scrap of paper with my blue pen, the same one that had labeled the binder. My voice carried, gentle and steady. I said out loud the things I had told Kendall's yard. That fuss is a dialect of love, that blessing is a matter of hands placed on heads and of names remembered loud enough to pass down. I said I was sorry I had let my hurt sit too long without saying it plainly. I asked for understanding and offered it in return. When I finished, Ashley moved and laced her hand through mine in a way that startled me with its boldness. She pressed the pearls to the inside of her palm and, in front of Pastor and the candle, she hooked them over and let them rest on her neck. They sat against her skin like moons learned to orbit a different sky. Later, when we walked out, Buddy trotted along, his tail the kind of punctuation a dog knows how to make. People hugged us and left with plates of cookies Pastor's wife had baked. On the ride home, Daniel drove, and we all three fell quiet. Not the silence of a shut door, but of something folded up with care. He reached back and touched my shoulder the way a child reaches for comfort. "Thanks, Mom," he said, and his voice was small and full. "You were right to come." The consequences of that blessing were subtle and also stubbornly practical. Ashley began, in time, to seek my opinion on things I expected she might not. She asked how I kept gravy from separating and whether the hydrangeas would do better with morning sun or afternoon. She didn't want my pearls every day, but she asked to borrow them for my mother's centennial next summer. The idea that my mother might have been alive to meet this woman made a tiny, achy happiness in me. She called me, not to nag, but to ask if I could meet her at the farmer's market. And we compared tomatoes the way old friends compare grandchildren. There were rough edges, of course. Once she forgot to call when she stayed late at her job, and I sat up worrying until the sun came up, and the truth was, no one can be both a lighthouse and also stay burning without sleep. We argued once about the mantle, about whether a new photograph of their life should replace Frank's picture, and then talked until we found a place for both pictures to breathe. A few months later, in the squat, warm month of August, Ashley texted me a picture. It was of her with a tiny, pink, wrinkled face in her arms. "We did it," the message said, and then a string of emoji that made me laugh out loud at the kitchen table. My hands shook, and they weren't the hands of a woman who'd lost time. They were the hands of a woman who had spent years folding love into small packages and then watched them open. That afternoon she came by with the baby and set the tiny head against my shoulder. For a minute the house was everything it had always been. The smell of coffee, the sound of Buddy's nails, the soft weight of another small life deciding to exist in our world. She wore the pearls to the hospital, not fully on her neck, but as a small token pinned to her blouse, a different kind of circle. They kept me steady, she told me later, and there were tears at the edges of her sentence that made both of us laugh and then cry in a good, honest way. The pearls had become, for her, less an object than a compass. They did not bind her to a role she did not want. They anchored her in a family who would teach this child how to make dinner rolls and how to forgive. The object, those small moons of white, remained a metaphor in my life after that. I would sometimes wake in the middle of the night and think of them clicking softly in the palm, a bead-by-bead record of women who had loved, who had survived, who had taught another pair of hands what to do. Pearls take time. They are made from a slight irritation wrapped in patient layers into something luminous. I like that. It is not a metaphor for perfection. It is a metaphor for what steadiness can do with a little grit and a willingness to be held. There were other happy reconciliations, potluck agreements where Ashley and I served side by side, a small 4th of July where she insisted we make her mother's charred corn recipe, and then admitted she couldn't follow it because the heat made her anxious. So I took the pan and made a second version that we both laughed at as it came out a little too sweet. Daniel and I repaired the way two people do who love each other, with small generosity and reminders of memory. He learned to say I'm sorry without adding but, and I learned to forgive without taking notes. Sometimes at night, when the house is hushed and the porch light stares into the yard like an old friend, I touch the pearls and think of how close grief and joy are. They are not opposites so much as directions one day points and another chooses later. I have learned that I do not diminish myself by letting another person decide how to do things. I enlarge myself by keeping the door open and by bringing potato salad when invited. There is freedom in refusing to be an eraser. There were moments, of course, that tested my resolve. Someone suggested, at a family gathering months later, that the courthouse thing had been a bit much. I felt the old sting rise like a remembered salt. But then Ashley leaned in and told, in a few sentences that were steady and plain, why she had been afraid of spectacle and why she had needed to keep it small. People listened. Conversation did not end in the kind of petty victory that ruins dinners. It bent back toward understanding. The pearls sat on my dresser that night, and when I touched them I did not find resentment. I found a ring of light that seemed to hum. The most lasting consequence of everything, the elopement, the backyard, the blessing, the kitchen with dough on the counter, was a quieter house. Not empty, not less, the opposite. There was a new rhythm where we all took up slightly different parts of the chorus. Ashley and I developed a shorthand. She would text me a picture of something she thought I'd like and sign it Mom. And I would answer with a line from a song Daniel used to listen to in the car. You've got to learn to bend without breaking. Sometimes we sang it aloud as we drove to pick up cherry pies. A wedding had happened the day they wanted it to happen. What followed was not a battle for the rest of their lives, but the slow and practical business of belonging. We did not agree on everything. I do not expect the world to be soft because I asked for it, but we agreed to make a space where difference is allowed to be tender. There are too many stories where people wear their good choices like armor. Ours became, instead, a practice of showing up. When I think of the pearls now, I think of them as moons, small white crescents that have known hands and have a memory of the necks that once wore them. They are a circle that knows how to hold a beginning and a memory at once. A mother's blessing wrapped in nacre. I place them in the dish beside my bed, and sometimes I take them and set them on my palm and let the cool weight remind me who I am. A woman who has folded grief into casseroles and kept her son from feeling alone. A woman who can step forward and who can step back. A woman who will teach another woman to braid dough and hold her hand while the yeast wakes. If this little part of my life has touched something in you, the stubbornness to keep your own small lights burning, the ache of being left out, the promise that forgiveness is a practice more than a feeling, tell me about it. Leave a comment. Press like if your heart leaned toward the kitchen with us, and subscribe if you want to hear more quiet persistence from the corner of Columbus, where I keep my binder and my blue pen. There is room at my table, and blessing or not, there is always a warm roll for someone who has come a long way to learn how to make their hands work. We live by small circles: the ring on a hand, the loop of a plate on a table, the turn of a shoulder toward another's. Sometimes the world asks you to prove you belong. Sometimes it asks you only to be steady. I choose the latter: steady enough to have patience, brave enough to say the truth, generous enough to offer bread. In the end, love is the art of showing up with a pair of hands and a willingness to be surprised by the ways the people you love change the light in your life.